Episode 78 of Fish Unfiltered. I'm Kevin Barral, your host, here with my friend and co-host, Isaac Azout. We have Ely Sussman, founder of Fish on First. Trade deadline is gone, and all of a sudden, we're looking at the same team almost, essentially, except two players that were dealt. And to many, that would be a surprise, especially with rumors dating back to spring training, assuming Sandy would be gone. Then all of a sudden, midway through the year, everyone thought Edward Cabrera would be gone. Damn, even Quantrill many thought would be gone, but they're all here and they're still pitching, and they've all pitched ever since the trade deadline. So, Isaac, when 6 o'clock struck and you saw that this was essentially the same team, the only trade that the Marlins made was Jesús Sánchez, that day at least, Jesús Sánchez to the Houston Astros in exchange for one pitcher, two prospects. What was your initial reaction?
I didn't understand it. I was a little bit concerned going into the deadline about like maybe 2 weeks before. They kept winning ball games, right? We were all covering this team and they were being extremely competitive. And we kept asking ourselves, hey, is this going to affect their strategy going into the July 31st trade deadline? And Peter Bendix acknowledged it straight up, which is something that he doesn't do very often. He answered a question. He said, yes, it did. It did have a factor in what we did. I also believe, from what I understand, that teams were not willing to give up. The teams did not value those two starting pitchers in Cabrera and Sandy the way that the Marlins did. They did not want to sacrifice Sandy for a mediocre package. And Cabrera, it seems like teams sort of knew what kind of pitcher Edward Cabrera is, and they were not convinced that these last 3 months or so were reminiscent of the player that he can be going forward. So Miami said, you know what, we're gonna stick to where we are right now and go forward with this team that is playing extremely good baseball. They have just swept the Yankees coming after the deadline. And this is a team that is 7 games out of a wild card spot. I looked at it as a win-win. If they did cash in, quote unquote, on Cabrera, they were going to get a hell of a haul. And if they didn't, they're going to have one of the best rotations in baseball going out there every fifth day for the rest of the season. So it's going to be an exciting time. Definitely good for business. The fact that they did stand pat, and we're going to see how this next 2 months play out.
Eli, if no bold predictions hit, yours will. Yeah. Sandy Alcantara was not traded. You called this since the offseason. Why do you think that was? Obviously, we saw what he did in his last start. That one was not good. It was really bad against the Astros. First one out of the for him. Post-trade deadline. Stuff, it's still just lack of swing and miss, but it seemed like kind of the trend all season. It's one inning where he really struggles, and he looks pretty good the rest of the way through. And he completed 7 for the second time this season.
Yeah, it's something that I touched on leading up to the deadline. I just felt that there was this weird disconnect between how excited Marlins fans were getting about Sandy turning a corner and what I was watching. Like I've seen a guy that over the course of the season, his control has been greatly improved, and that's important. That was the reason why there were at times where we were thinking maybe he needs a phantom IL stint. This is getting embarrassing. This is hard to watch. A lot of that was because he was either falling behind in counts too often or handing out too many walks. And there has been a real trend since the start of June that even continued this past outing, where he is at least attacking the strike zone and being really efficient in ways that actually allows him to go deep into games. He was able to go 7 in his most recent outing and had done so a couple starts prior to that in a way that any team would value that, any contending team to some extent, though, but not to the extent where you take on a $17 million salary this year and $17 million the rest of next year and give up some of their very best prospects for him when, as you perfectly noted, the swing and miss still is at a career low level. For a guy that has had success in his career without needing a ton of that, there's still like a gray area where you don't want to fall beneath. There's a certain, you can't rely entirely on the defense behind you. Otherwise, you're going to get innings like exactly the most recent one as we're speaking here against the Astros, a 5-run inning, if I remember that correctly, where it was just hit after hit after hit. And there's only so much a pitcher, how high a ceiling a pitcher can reach if they're not creating enough swing and miss. So yeah, in his case, I just felt he wasn't really in a spot where other teams would value him as a frontline starter. And I think you could argue, was he for sure like a solid middle of the rotation starter that you'd want starting playoff games this year? The reason why deadline deals get made above all else is guys that can reinforce a contending team the rest of this year, all the way through October. In both Cabrera's case, and I think even more so in Sandy's case, there was a question in terms of how dominant they can be right now. Even if you like them long term, those are conversations that could be revisited in the offseason. And I think in both cases, it would not surprise me if the Marlins make one of those trades in the offseason. But they're mixed there's just a lot of mixed signals coming from both of them at this deadline that, yeah, I understand that they weren't able to reach a deal. The risk, of course, is that when your big assets on the trade block are pitchers, the injury factor is a lot different than with position players. You just don't know what sort of arm, specifically an elbow or shoulder thing, could go wrong down the stretch. The window sometimes is a lot smaller than you think in terms of being able to cash in on those chips.
And a lot of credit to the Marlins for kind of staying pat with their price. They didn't lower it, never, no matter what happens. That's a big reason why we saw a lot of tier 2, tier 3 pitchers get traded at the end of the day. The Sorokas and all those other type of guys got moved. And you didn't see Joe Ryan, you didn't see Mitch Keller get moved, you didn't see, obviously, Sandy Cabrera. So the Marlins stood pat with the price, and they kept it. And now they have a second half to kind of fix this. But Isaac, on the Cabrera front, obviously, it did seem like there was some dialogue between two teams. You noted this in your article when Peter Bennett spoke to the media about the Cubs, what was going on there, what was not offered to Miami in that trade.
Yeah, really quick on what you said earlier, Kevin. When you look around the league, Andrew Heaney wasn't traded by the Pirates. Tommy Pham wasn't traded. So it was an interesting seller's market. It was a seller's market, but a lot of guys that you would have thought would have been dealt by these non-contending teams were held on to for some reason. But regarding Cabrera, yes, the Marlins received heavy interest on their very ultra-talented right-hander. The Cubs were the most prominent team that were in discussion. The Cubs needed a starting pitcher more than any other team in Major League Baseball, in my opinion. And they did add some depth, no doubt about it, but they did not add that true rotation staple that they could have in Cabrera. From what I understand, they were willing to part with Owen Casey, their top prospect, but not much else. I believe, the uncertainty regarding Kyle Tucker and his free agency decision probably factored into that. But it just, to me, seemed like a weird time to start prospect hugging. If you're the Cubs, you're pretty much going all in here, and you're trying to win a World Series where, you're in the same division as the best team in baseball, in my opinion, the Milwaukee Brewers. They were willing to go give up Owen Casey, but nothing else of value anyway. It was a few more throw-ins, I could say, but it was nothing of value. And I believe that Marlins fans would have been underwhelmed if that trade had come to fruition. And regarding Sandy, they were not willing to go with Owen Casey. It was a lot less, unfortunately, for the former Cy Young Award winner.
And again, rightfully so. You clearly want the best package possible, but when you had a 6.66 ERA going into the trade deadline, you're not going to get a lot. And even then, when there were signs of improvements, it was there's a lot of inconsistencies with Sandy. We already spoke about it, but yeah, I think any package for Sandy, if you would have made the trade, would have been pretty underwhelming. You weren't going to get a Lombard. You weren't going to get a Spencer Jones. They didn't want to trade Casey. So, realistically, you're looking at middle of the pack prospects in the top 30 or low end top 100 prospects. So,
yeah.
And
Cabrera, especially, he's got 3 years of control after this year.
Mm-hmm.
You're expecting a haul if you move that player, and teams were not willing to meet that price at all. And it was a little bit surprising to me. Not so much. We all got that injury scare. What was it, a month ago with the elbow tightness, I believe it was. And he has just so many years of inconsistency and injury concerns that you can see why teams were unwilling to meet the price. But the way that he's pitching and the way he can pitch and the years of control, I don't blame Miami for expecting a ginormous haul. Unfortunately, it just never came to that. And yeah, all the Yankee reports, from what I understand also, which was a bunch of horse hockey, they did not speak on deadline day. The Marlins held out a firm price for both of those pitchers. They're not really enamored with Spencer Jones. I don't know if Sandy continues to struggle. Maybe they'll settle in the offseason, but the Yankee stuff didn't really generate a lot of talk.
Well, even then, you have even if Sandy doesn't look the greatest to finish out the year, you have the first half of 2026. So and you never know if they believe they could compete in 2026, which all signs point to could be a pretty good team. We'll see what happens. But right now, yeah, you couldn't sell low on the player, but at the same time, you can't, overvalue him or whatever it may have been. And I do think the Marlins were maybe asking for a little bit too much compared, obviously seeing what you'd seen this year. Clearly, he hasn't been able to find himself to a consistent level to what he even looked in 2023, when every once in a while he'd give you a complete game shutout, but that wasn't the case. That hasn't been the case. last name we'll quickly mention on the pitching side, and this one brought a lot of discourse, and we'll keep it extremely short. Cal Quantrill. Nobody wanted Cal Quantrill. The Marlins had to call other teams asking about Cal Quantrill, and I think, Eli, best way to say it is, if he continues to suck like he did yesterday, they will put him on waivers and allow another team to take him.
I got a little bit ahead of myself on the side. There was a little article I wrote about how he was one of the better free agent signings they've made in like 3 years since Jorge Soler. And that was under the assumption that he would have some sort of value at the trade deadline. That the whole point of signing him was to eat innings, especially early in the year, knowing that Yuri was going to be coming back from TJ, knowing that Braxton Garrett was going to be on the shelf. That especially early in the year, I thought he had real value to the team in order to eat those innings. And he thought the goal was have him do well enough in order to flip him at the deadline, assuming that the team was somewhat out of the race. And even in this case where they weren't completely out of it, I feel like that was the goal as well. That if there was any substantial interest in him, even if you want to say like a 35 grade prospect, anybody that is more than organizational filler, that they would have done a deal. He's just a very complicated player, and I don't think the team really helped themselves with the way that they treated him, where he burned them a couple times early in the year trying to go a third time through a lineup, and then they put the clamps on where he just wouldn't go 3 times through a lineup or anywhere close to that, even when he was having success. That sort of player just is hard to fit into a contending team's plan, where those teams, he wasn't in. Even though he was perceived to be an innings eater when they acquired him, he wasn't eating that many innings because the pitching staff wasn't coaching staff, I should say, wasn't all that confident in the way that he would be able to affect games a third time through a lineup. So he was just a sort of player that kind of fits well on the team he was on, but not really well at all on any contending teams. Now, to be fair, there were a couple pitchers traded that were comparable in ways. Chris Paddock going to the Tigers, Michael Soroka going to the Cubs. Like, those are players that are very similar in terms of Quantrill performance and some of their limitations. So, like, if those guys had some sort of value, then why didn't Quantrill had value at the same age, under same contractual status? I can't fully answer that. And it's in a very small sample post deadline. Unfortunately, you see one of those clunkers that he only had very early in the year. That was kind of in negotiations with other teams. You imagine the Marlins were trying to convince other teams that April was a anomaly and that the real Cal Quantrill was the guy we'd seen the previous 3 months going to the deadline, where it was an ERA in the mid threes. But perhaps I would make an educated guess that other teams weren't buying that, and that they still had some concerns about his old issues coming back up. So you understand it down the stretch, and as you noted, they do have another opportunity to at least save some salary later this month if they put him on waivers. So we'll see if that's a priority. It depends on how they feel about the options coming up behind him in AAA.
I can see why teams would value Chris Paddock more than Quantrill, even if it's just a little bit. At least Chris Paddock is, he has a little bit more pedigree, a little bit, and he's also shown the ability to go 7-8 innings a few times this year with slightly better numbers, a little bit more WAR. But if Soroka was the main one for me, that if he can get traded to the Cubs, I don't know why the Cubs wouldn't offer a little bit more for someone like Quantrill or one of the two main ones.
On the position player side, the only player moved, well, 2 players were moved. We'll start with Fortes, who was traded to the Tampa Bay Rays in a 1-for-1 deal for a MLB pipeline top 30 prospect, Matthew Etzel, who made his organizational, I guess, quote unquote, his organizational debut. He did play with the organization in Jupiter in a rehab assignment, had a base hit, a very lucky base hit, but a base hit regardless. And it's a solid player, nothing too crazy. You'll go to AA after this. But Isaac, your thoughts? Fortes getting dealt. This is something we are hearing a lot about maybe a couple weeks before. We were told 100%, and he 100% was dealt. The Tampa Bay Rays traded away Danny Jansen to bring in Nick Fortes, and they brought in someone else too at the deadline. They have a new catching duo in Tampa.
Yeah, I will repeat how I felt about it at the time. And if I had known that the Marlins were going to stand pat for the most part and somewhat try to be competitive this year, I would have held on to Nick Fortes. I think Nick Fortes added a lot of value. No disrespect to Matthew Etzel. I think he's a solid prospect and someone who could definitely maybe help the Marlins in the major leagues at some point soon. But Nick Fortes behind the dish is so much more valuable to this pitching staff, to this team, than Mr. Matthew Etzel. I think that to have him catching guys like Sandy and Cabrera and Quantrill, I understand that they want to see what they have in Agustin Ramirez, but if 3 idiots like us can see it, I'm sure the Marlins can. I think it's more of stubbornness, just wanting to make sure get as much value as you can from your players, and if Ramirez is catching, that really increases the value. But to me, I think Fortes, whether it's in the clubhouse or behind the dish, he offered a lot more value to the Marlins than he did on the trade market. So I would have liked to see him stay with the Marlins, and maybe in the offseason you revisit these talks, see how Joe Mack progresses. I understand we can't have 4 catchers, but I'm a fan of what they got for him, but I would have liked to see him stay.
And then Jesús Sánchez, which the only move they made on deadline day, goes to the Astros for Ryan Gusto, Chase Jaworski, and Esmail Valencia. Valencia and Jaworski, 2 prospects. Gusto made his AAA debut or organizational debut. I didn't realize this. He only went 1 inning, so maybe potentially Saturday in Atlanta as the 27th man. I know a certain fan reporter mentioned that. Won't mention his name, but we'll see if that's the case. We haven't heard anything yet. Obviously, they could go with Adam Mazur, who already made his Marlins debut at the major league level against the Phillies. Wasn't great, wasn't terrible, but Eli, they trade Sanchi to call up Marsee, and all of a sudden, Jakob Marsee looks like a stud. Like, he was a stud in AAA. He was great. He was a little slow to start the season, but he got it going. Yeah, all the underlying numbers that we were talking about, I was talking about, everyone was talking about that he had started to show, and he's a solid player. He's great. Speed's there, hits well, has some power, and he had his first career home run in the middle game of that Astros series. So your really quick thoughts on the trade. I know we addressed this trade already, but trading for Sanchez and calling up Marsee and what you've seen so far with him.
It seems like of all the position players to go, even more so than Fortes, I thought Sanchez was a virtual lock. As long as another contending team valued him, that's been the tricky part when we talk about Quantrill and with Fortes. That was the question. And with Sanchez, somewhat of a question too, just because he wasn't having an amazing year. He was basically having the same year he had the previous 2 seasons with the Marlins, where he was a little bit better than a league average hitter against right-handed pitching, and he's unplayable against lefties. His defense was actually even slightly better in my eyes this year than we'd seen it before, even though it's still awkward. He has a very unique style about him, the way that he approaches balls and the routes he takes. But overall, he was still doing fine out there in right field. So it was just about finding a fit that made sense right now in order to make room for some of the outfielders they have both right now and even looking ahead to next season, when you have Griffin Conine coming back from an injury, when you have Kemp Alderman getting perhaps a cup of coffee at some point in 2026. Like, they have, that's one area of depth that this organization had in terms of corner outfield guys. And in Marsee, I think you can see it already in the small sample in the big leagues that he is legit in center field. And that's a position that the Marlins haven't entirely had locked up this year. So they're going to give him an audition to do that down the stretch. Being able to sell Sanchez and get 3 different pieces that each bring something to the equation, I think it was fair value. Nothing to be overly excited about, but something that seems fair. With Gusto adding just a little bit more rotation depth, it seems assured that he will pitch in the big leagues down the stretch when they need it. During this stretch, we're talking that time where Marlins have 28 games scheduled over the next 29 days, their most game-intensive stretch of the season so far. Even if, I mean, you hope that nobody gets hurt whatsoever, but there are even little pockets in there where you wonder if they might insert a 6-man into the rotation very briefly, something like that. So you just needed a little extra depth, and they liked what they saw with Gusto. We had good analysis on our site from Sean McCormick about some adjustments he could make to potentially raise his ceiling a little bit more rather than just being a 5th starter swingman. He could be a little bit better than that moving forward with the right tweaks. And yeah, with other prospects, good first impression from Esmail Valencia. Just watching him this past weekend with Jupiter, the athleticism stands out. The batted ball quality was pretty good right away, and he's getting some reps in center field for the time being. So if he could stick there, then that just gives that's a guy that could have a lot of helium and could rise up their prospect list pretty quickly. So yeah, fair value. And Sanchez, as you noted firsthand, he seems very happy to be with Houston, a team that has extremely high expectations every single year. And right away, he's off to a good start, where I think he's gotten on base every single game that he's been with Houston. So it's just seems like a win-win deal right there. That also happens to clear some money for the Marlins. Sanchez was their highest paid position player on their active roster. So that's just one other consideration that may have gone into it. The Fish on First podcast is presented by About the Fans. We are proud to partner with them this season on a new merchandise collection featuring t-shirts, hats, stickers, and other accessories that Marlins fans will absolutely love. Shop the FOF collection at aboutthefans.com, and you save 10% with our special coupon code FOF10. Enter FOF10 at checkout to save 10% at aboutthefans.com.
Last thing on the trade front, Isaac, Dane Myers was almost moved to, I believe it was the Reds. Talk to us about that. Guy who'd been struggling for a little bit, but regardless of that, 29 years old, teams were interested. Could be a solid outfielder, fourth outfielder, play all three spots. I would say his future is a little bleak here in Miami right now because he still provides value on the defensive front and he has the power, but man, he has been really bad recently. And it's tough to see because he's a great guy, but he's been struggling. There's no other way to put it. Struck out 3 times against the Astros. And the first game came into pinch hit for it was Marsee actually, and he struck out too. So seems like he's been a little bit too aggressive recently at the plate, but he was almost moved at the deadline.
Teams were interested. The deadline was a month prior. I think you see him get moved. I spoke with him on August 1st, day after the deadline, first game of the Yankees series, and he was ecstatic to still be here. He realizes the opportunity here, and apparently, from what I understood, the Marlins had conversations with the Reds, as well as brief ones, but not really lengthened ones with the New York Mets as well. You can see the fit for both those teams. Fortunately, I think Dane offers a lot of value both inside the clubhouse and on the field to this team. So nothing really came of those talks. But yeah, Dane Myers has struggled, Kevin. So Shan could see we got off to such a great start when he started playing every single day, especially in that month of June. He's playing really well, but just the back end of July and early into August, it's been a little bit of a slump, especially slugging percentage-wise. The power hasn't really shown up a little bit. We know what he's capable of, but I think Marlins aren't too concerned with him, especially defensively. You know what he's capable of too.
All right, so let's talk about this Yankees series. They sweep the Yankees for the first time in franchise history. First game was probably the most thrilling game of the season by far. I don't think there's anything that really comes close to that. Maybe the Kyle Stowers grand slam, but outside of that, I mean, Stowers hit a grand slam in that game too. So it just goes to show that. And then the next 2 games, I mean, the Marlins shut out the Yankees in game 2. Yuri was awesome. And game 3, it was an ass beating. Like the Yankees have looked terrible since the deadline. And the funniest part about this whole thing, well, first of all, yes, attendance was awesome, over 100K between all 3 games. We have to get confirmation, but apparently the last 2 games were sellouts. I guess they may have done a change to how many seats there are at the ballpark because there was 37 originally. Now I guess 34 is a sellout. Who knows? But Isaac, you were there for that first game. That was an awesome game. Like, regardless if you were there or not, like the fact that this team was losing at 1.6-0, and they came back, then they were down again, and they came back, and it was Gus on like the softest hit ball of his career, probably walks it off. And the Yankees' new bullpen toys all gave up a run. They all blew it, literally. And Jose Caballero, who was the position player acquired on deadline day, had a fielding error in left. I'm sorry, right field,
right,
and let the ball go, and that allowed X to get to third. So really bad time for Yankees fans. The Marlins may have broken the Yankees. Jake Bird has since then been optioned to AAA, and a lot of struggles for Yankee land recently, and things are going pretty bad for them.
In the history of that ballpark, we discussed this on the live stream on Monday. It is the craziest back and forth contest I have ever witnessed. You mentioned the new toys fresh off the deadline, a really aggressive deadline by the New York Yankees. 9 earned runs in 2 1/3 inning by those 3 relievers that you mentioned, Kevin. Just something that I've never witnessed before. You mentioned the lead changes, 6-0 Yankees. Then when it became 9-4 Yankees, I don't think anyone on the planet expected Miami to be able to come back from that. And then once again in the 9th inning, Miami blew it, allowing 2 earned runs and being down going to the bottom half, down by 2. Once again, come back with a couple of hits. That crucial error by Jose Caballero and right. Just like it happened, he rose his head a little bit too fast, and the ball gets under his glove, rolls to the warning track, and pretty much sealed the deal for the Marlins. And you mentioned the Agustin Ramirez swinging bunt. A great base running by Edwards. You did not hesitate whatsoever, scored on that ball that maybe went 5 feet in front of home plate. And like I said, I think that catapulted the Marlins for the rest of the series, and it was the craziest game I've ever seen with my two eyes. But the Yankees have not won since before the trade deadline. They are 0-5 to begin the second half. I'm sorry, Eli. I'm sorry, Doug. It's been a tough go for the New York Yankees.
Yeah, right. Eli, I mean, your thoughts on this series? I mean, all of a sudden, the Marlins find themselves now not 2 games under 500, but they did finish the series 55-55. I believe there were 16 games under 500 at one point. Marlins are, I mean, unless they really suck the rest of the way through, they're going to surpass their 62 win total from last season.
Yes, I would hope
it's
so.
looking great. You would hope so. You would hope so.
They'd have to be historically bad the rest of the way to not surpass. It's just a question of how much. And yeah, just to echo, I feel like this was the highest point of the season. I could be wrong, but I feel like this was the peak of the year to upset a team like this. One that, frankly, hadn't been playing all that well for a period of time coming into the series. The Marlins had been outplaying the Yankees over the last 2 months heading into this matchup. It wasn't a shock that the Marlins won the series, but to do it, for it to be a sweep, and in this particular fashion, as you guys emphasized on Friday, 3 separate occasions where it felt like that game was over in favor of the Yankees. And for them to come back with some help of some Yankees incompetence, and it really more so just highlights how fundamentally sound the Marlins have been for most of this good stretch of the season. It sticks out when they don't play a clean game, as they have on a couple occasions. There was that loss to the Cardinals in their series opener, and you could say the one to the Astros most recently this week. Those are total anomalies. The vast majority of games, they give themselves a chance in terms of just making a lot of routine plays, having smart positioning, taking advantage of just making fewer mistakes than the other team does. That's something you just don't expect from the youngest team in the league. Those are the mistakes that a young team is supposed to be more prone to making than other ones. A team that has a very inexperienced coaching staff with quote unquote rookies at a lot of different spots on that coaching staff. So that has been probably the biggest change overall from what I anticipated coming into the year, is just how this team does all the little things right, generally speaking, in order to give themselves a chance to stay in these games. It's been really impressive. That's what the fan base has kind of rallied behind, is that if they watch this team day in and day out, and you just see them generally keep things close and look like a really complete team at times, in a way that I think that I understand why people were relieved that they held on to as many players as they did, just to give themselves a fighting chance, because they have really found their groove in a way that I thought would probably take more than 1 year in order to do so, to do it not even halfway through this season, to really find that groove, instead of taking it being a more traditional rebuilding process. That understandably has a lot of people extremely excited and hopeful for how soon this rebuild can turn the corner, if it hasn't already.
Guys, Javier Sanoja hit 2 home runs in that game on Friday too. I don't know if he was drug tested after, but then he also hit one on Monday.
Mm-hmm.
Monday. So he has 4 home runs on the season. Like, who would have thought? Javier Sanoja. Derek Hill also came back. He hit a home run. They did some thing with the pinch hits. It was 2 pinch hit home runs on that Monday game. First time since 2006. Yeah. So, Isaac, your thoughts on Jakob Marsee? We got Eli's. Want to get yours? I mean, the guy continues to be awesome. Like, those plate appearances on Friday were extremely, extremely impressive against some really good arms too. I mean, Duvall, you had Rodon, and there was another one, but like really good plate appearances from Marsee.
The way I'm hearing his name pronounced, it's Marsee. A little emphasis on the C part, on the S-E-E-E. But I guess, and yeah, Marsee is good of a start to a major league career as you can hope for. What is it? 4 extra base hits. He is 6 for 12 with 5 extra base hits, 3 doubles, a triple, a home run. He's got as many walks as he has strikeouts. He's playing a great center field. He was acquired, obviously, on May 4th of last year in the Luis Arraez trade, along with Dylan Head, Nathan Martorella, and Woo Suk Go, who has since been released. And just what I want to touch on with Marsee is his really weird 2024 year, where he just could not hit the baseball whatsoever. What was his final slash line across 2 leagues in AA and AAA? He had a 315 slugging. He had an OPS of 661. The Marlins pretty much bought low on this player, but there's obviously something they liked, and he has since come over to the Marlins organization and has hit the ground running. AAA Jacksonville this year, an 817 OPS. He has some it seems like he's increased his power. He had a 460-foot home run for Jacksonville a couple of weeks ago before he was called up. And to make your major league debut in that setting against the New York Yankees in front of 101,000 people over the weekend and continue playing pretty much every single day against both lefties and righties, he might end up being the best player acquired in that Luis Ariz trade.
Yeah. So last name I want to mention before we begin to wrap up, and we have to, like, it's really disappointing the way this guy's been playing, and that's Eric Wagaman. Like, dude,
He homered yesterday, Kevin.
Yeah, so did Javier Sanoja 2 days ago. So, you know, that home run didn't change my thoughts. But like, he's really struggling. Like seriously, like the guy struggled. It's really tough to see. Obviously, they called up Troy. It seems like they're kind of, you know, splitting time between those two. Isaac, like, what are you seeing with Wagaman? Like, McCullough's mentioned, like, you know, he's been elevating the ball, and clearly he is. Like, I'm not going to deny that. But, you know, like, at what point do you say enough is enough and let's call up someone else? Clearly there's not many great options, but I'd much rather see Davis and De Los Santos at the major league level work it out than Eric Wagaman, which we know what he is at this point.
Right. That was going to be my question, Yuka, and I don't mean it like in a condescending way. Like, who would be the answer? I don't know. Like, you look at what Eric Wagaman does against left-handed pitching, and it's decent. He's OPSing 725, so you'd think it'd be a perfect platoon situation with Troy. But the amount of time you see Liam Hicks play first base, and you don't really want Augustine behind the plate every single day. You mentioned De Los Santos. He's been all right. He has been a little bit better in terms of putting the ball in play, but I don't think now is the right time to call him up. Maybe September, I think, makes more sense. So from what I see, I think they're going to keep him up here because I don't see a better option unless you guys do.
Yeah. I mentioned
Jacob Berry.
No. Not I mean,
I would rather see him than him.
We've seen at times Heriberto Hernandez take practice reps at first base. I thought that would be a priority because, as you said, there really isn't anybody at AAA or even AA at the moment that I feel immediately makes a lot of sense. We'll see what Nathan Martorella does. Maybe he has a little bit of Marsee syndrome where he has a mediocre year at AA and then all of a sudden just moving up to a different league, one that is a little bit more hitter friendly. We see better results from him. I wouldn't totally be out on Martorella, even though his career in the Marlins minor league system to this point has been underwhelming. But the immediate upgrades, I don't really see them in the minors, whether it's him, whether it's Davison, whether it is Matt Mervis just got released, or whether it's Jacob Berry, who has actually played very little first base, even though he's played basically everywhere else this year. To me, I think the pivot, if you were to make one, would be Hernandez playing more first base as part of a platoon situation. Now that the outfield is well taken care of between Marsee and Stowers, those are two guys that can play basically every day in left and center, and then you figure out right field between everybody else. That I would make that shift. I'm not personally familiar with how raw Hernandez's defense is at first base because he's so far removed from playing it in any professional games, and he's certainly never done it in the big leagues. But he's somebody that I think unequivocally is a more capable hitter than Wagaman is. So then you make some corresponding move and option Wagaman and bring up somebody else at a different position. It's really not a clear pivot here to somebody else unless they're willing to do that. And yeah, frankly, I can't say with enough authority that I know that Heriberto Hernandez is a competent defender at first base. If he is, then I would just simply have him and Troy platoon for the most part at that position.
I want to wrap up with the draft picks. They all made their debuts on Tuesday. Tuesday. Iva, Arquette, and Brandon Compton both began in Beloit, along with the catcher. I believe it's Wilson Weber from Oregon State. The rest of them are all in Jupiter. Cam Canarella is the only one that will be at the FCL. It's late start. Trap was the last one to sign. Isaac, any surprises here? I really don't. Maybe a little surprised with Arquette, but I think it's the right move.
Yeah, good question. It's interesting. I think that if I remember correctly, Blades, that you just have to go back on previous college drafts.
Started in high A.
College position players. That is when Jupiter was high A, correct? And right. So yeah, he started in high A and he was all right. He was fine. And then he pretty much went to double A the next year. I'm not mistaken.
It was the 2020 year, so he
Right.
he
He
won,
didn't
he
have
won
a minor
double
league.
A after, yeah.
Right. So I think the way they look at it is that, hey, Beloit, the weather's okay right now. So I think they want to expedite this process a little bit at least and have him face some pretty solid competition. You mentioned the college career, every single player, college career, college hitter, so they're able to do it. Maybe they don't love how much room there is in Jupiter. But yeah, not a huge surprise. I think we saw that coming. I think if Canarella had signed as quick as Iva did, I think you see him employed as well. And it's going to be a really exciting time. You're starting to see the fluctuation of the rosters in the minor leagues happen all over the place. Some releases, some moves to the development list, etc. So it's these last 2 years of the minor league season is always a really fun time to just take a look at the draft picks, especially when they're college guys up in higher-ish levels like Beloit. Maybe someone will go to Pensacola. You see just promotions across the league, and you can actually see them on minor league baseball TV.
Eli, thoughts on any debut that stood out to you? I think we could go with that. Most of these guys debuted. There was a couple pitchers as well. So Arquette as well debuted. Brian Compton debuted. Everyone here, I think, debuted, or at least started most of these games, except maybe a couple. And then thoughts on the releases. Big one was Vradenberg, was a third-round pick literally 2 years ago. He's gone. I know you're holding the smile, but it is a third-round pick. And a couple guys that weren't released, Mervis was released. I heard he requested the release. So there's that. But Eli, just thoughts on the releases, because that's always huge. You hate to see it, but it does sometimes take you by surprise, a couple guys. And then any debuts that stood out.
Yeah, with the releases, I could show everybody on the screen the numbers that they're putting up this season. It's an interesting mixed bag because Mervis in particular was playing very well in Jacksonville since getting sent down. Since being DFA'd, clearing waivers, getting sent down. 924 OPS, 13 home runs in 35 games. Matt Mervis is, I think, tied for second in the Marlins minor league system in home runs this year. Only counting his minor league home runs, he is second among all Marlins minor leaguers in homers this season. Any caveat you want to apply to that, it's pretty impressive. And the strikeout rate was still elevated, but not nearly to the same extent it was in the big league level. They just reached a point where, they were not. It's an interesting decision considering the struggles of Wagaman that they had, that they felt they didn't feel that Mervis would be an upgrade of any sort compared to what they're already getting from Wagaman. And as your understanding is that he kind of requested his release, thinking there might be a slightly better opportunity somewhere else down the stretch of the season. The rest of these guys are ones that simply were not performing much at all of the season. Mostly guys from the upper minors like Harrison Spahn, a utility guy. Jake Thompson has occasionally been a great hitter in the minors at the lower levels, but a lot of injuries have come his way, and now finally his production, especially in the slugging department, came down. The most notable one to bring up would be Jun Suk Shim. I remember when we had Craig Mish on the show right around 1 year ago, saying that the Marlins were prepared to miss out on that. They felt it was a guy that had a really high ceiling, but they also understood there was substantial risk involved given his injury history and the fact that they basically acquired him fresh coming off of an injury. We saw it in the fall league last year and more so in the complex league this year that he just cannot throw strikes anymore. And the velo has ticked down. His other secondary stuff didn't have the exact same bite to it that it had when he signed internationally a few years ago with the Pirates. So for them that player stands out because he's the youngest of this group, the one with the least minor league experience. This is a guy that only pitched about 20 innings in the minor leagues in his whole career. And they think that's enough to move on. So that just goes to show exactly the condition that he was in when acquired by the organization. When it comes to debuts, the one who had the most impressive one was Drew Perreault in Jupiter. He had 3 hits in his very first game. That was only a 7-inning game too. So he made the most of that one. And I know that our own Sean McCormick is pretty high on Perreault relative to his draft position. He had an article kind of highlighting why he thinks Perreault could be a nice value for where they got him in the 4th round, if I remember that correctly. Other than that, I should point out with Iva, that in his very first inning on defense, made 2 really good plays that are very different ones. One kind of charging in on a ball on shortstop and making an off-balance throw, and the other one backing up on one and having to leap to grab a line drive. So for those that have my understanding is that he is a legit defensive shortstop, even though size-wise, it's hard to see. There aren't very many comparables to that in the big leagues. He played that position really well at Oregon State. And in some aspects, it might be just as safe as a defender as he is as a hitter. So he only had one hit in this debut, but I think he did put the ball in play every single time he came up. And the fact that the athleticism does stand out because you just don't expect that from somebody who is 6'5" the way he is.
Isaac, any other promotions that stood out to you overall around this system? Obviously, we saw Ian Lewis get promoted. Eliezer Gismay get promoted. A lot of AAA promotions as well. So there was a lot of movement yesterday around the minor league system. A lot of new-looking teams.
Can't say that one really surprised me. A few of the guys going from Jupiter to Beloit, I remember being a little bit excited about, but other than that, no, nothing else that really stood out.
Alrighty then. I think we'll wrap it up here. 40 minutes in. I think spoke more than enough. So we'll wrap it up here. From Isaac, Eli, myself. We'll be back in 2 weeks, hopefully with a guest. Peace out and go fish.